a very prominent commentator on big power competition and the recent geopolitical changes that have been happening. And he's also a good friend. And we met many years ago in Beijing before the pandemic. But we've been meeting often virtually of late. All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. It's really a pleasure to host this meeting, and I'm very grateful to Madam Tahmina Janjua for accepting to chair the meeting, and very grateful to His Excellency Admiral Jayanath for taking out time from Colombo and to give his perspective. And Sri Lanka is a very important country in South Asia, and we really look forward to his perspective. And then, of course, His Excellency Mr. Su Siara, who is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Cambodia and a good friend of ours. So very kind of you, Excellency Su Siara, for joining. Dr. Wang Wen, of course, as I just mentioned, thank you for taking out time. And we really look forward to hearing your speech. And I'm following you on Twitter. You just made your Twitter account. And I also just made my Twitter account. So I see your very strident tweets that you've been tweeting. And then we have, of course, our dear friend, Mr. Keith Bennett, who is a prominent sinologist, and he is the co-editor of the Friends of Socialist China. And we also have, he will join us slightly later, in about half an hour, Mr. William Jones, who's the former White House correspondent for the Executive Intelligence Review, and also is a sinologist. So over to you, madam.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'd like to thank the Pakistan-China Institute for hosting this seminar on big power competition in the post-pandemic world order and the Belt and Road Initiative. Today's seminar is part of Friends of the Silk Road series launched by the Pakistan-China Institute in 2019. It is a platform that brings together parliamentarians, academics, media, journalists, women, youth, to discuss connectivity, Belt and Road. But it's not just hard connectivity, but soft connectivity, like people-to-people contacts as well, that this entire series aims at. I'll make a brief introduction and then move on to the speakers. If my brief introduction gets to be a little lengthy, excuse me, because I'm full of ideas on this. Today's seminar will provide us with an opportunity to firstly look at the global context in which the Belt and Road Initiative is being implemented. And secondly, to take a deeper look at some specific BRI partnerships in South and Southeast Asia. The Belt and Road Initiative, based on President Xi's vision for shared prosperity and development, is a historic undertaking. Never in the history of our world have so many resources been committed to human and infrastructure development by one country. China has made exponential strides in lifting over 800 million of its people from poverty and is now willing to share its experience in human and infrastructure development with partners in the developing world. CPEC is one such example. This is a laudable objective. I will make a few brief comments and then pass on to Syed Mushaid Hussain, Senator Syed Mushaid Hussain. First of all, the big picture. Since several years, there's increasing anxiety that the competition between the United States and China will morph into a conflictual relationship. There are very powerful lobbies in the US, both in the academia and among policymakers, which have a dangerously exaggerated view of China's objectives. They openly advocate that China's rise has to be contained and that it cannot be allowed to emerge as a challenger to American global hegemony. This lobby's position is underpinned by supposed lessons from history, as evidenced in lengthy dispositions of the Thucydides trap, and by an intensive body of literature coming from the quote-unquote realist school that argues that a conflict is inevitable between the US and China. This discussion has shaped not only the dominant discourse on the contours of global geopolitics, but is actually impacting on US and Western policies towards China, which have an unsettling conflict-driven tone. An example of the latter is Rush Doshi, who is part of the inner policy circles in Washington. I believe he's in the National Security Council. In his writings, Doshi has argued for a set of hard competition policies that are driven by a desire not to compete fairly, but to constrain and stifle China. These policies are being given effect. We are seeing actions to limit China's influence in international fora, to target China with onerous trade and economic obligations, and even to outrightly exclude China from trade and economic arrangements, such as the Indo-Pacific Framework for Prosperity, which I'm not sure China would want to join, but is the latest example of an arrangement. This is increasingly coupled by measures to restrict Chinese companies' access to Western markets like Huawei. And of course, at the political level, there's a frantic effort to build a network of coalitions and alliances with barely veiled ambitions to isolate China. This increasingly conflictual mindset is deeply unfortunate. The COVID-19 pandemic, from which the world has barely emerged, reminded us of the necessity of having more cooperative and more collaborative frameworks. The existential challenges posed by climate change, global health emergencies, food insecurity, and a fragile, inequitable economic order that condemns millions to woeful immiseration can only be countered by global arrangements underpinned by collaboration. BRI is one of the leading such arrangements. The conflictual mindset has disturbing implications for the BRI initiative. The dominant thinking in the US is not inclined to view the BRI as an economic and development initiative. Rather, it unfortunately sees it as a strategic move with distinct political and even military objectives. If this assessment is correct, then all partners engaged in BRI have to reflect on how to insulate the BRI from the headwinds emanating from Washington. The distinguished panelists, I'm sure, will have valuable insights both on the fast evolving global political environment, as well as on measures required to ensure that there'll be space for BRI projects to be implemented. Here, learning more about the experience of specific partners of the BRI becomes important. First, it would demonstrate the clear economic and development benefits arising from this initiative. Secondly, it would help to negate the alarmist narrative that the projects are having a negative financial and economic impact. Third, it would also help dispel fanciful notions about military aspects of this initiative. In essence, greater knowledge about the country level and sub-regional experiences with the BRI would help demonstrate the developmental value of this initiative. It would also help identify the challenges that we need to address to realize the full potential of the BRI. I leave you with these thoughts. I will now invite Senator Mushaid Hussain to make his opening remarks and share his views on the topic under discussion. I don't think I need to introduce Senator Mushaid Hussain Syed, who is well known. He has rich and varied experience as a journalist, politician, and has especially close understanding of international politics. He is the chairman of the Pakistan Senate Defense Committee and chair of the Pakistan-China Institute, and has extensive experience on China and BRI-related issues. So I'd pass on. I understand that he is traveling, and there is a video that we would be pleased to listen to.
Greetings from Islamabad. It's my pleasure to warmly welcome friends from all over the world at this important conference that we have convened online on the Friends of the Silk Road regarding the changing world order in the post-pandemic period and the role of the Belt and Road Initiative, which I may add, is probably the most important developmental and diplomatic initiative in the 21st century, launched by President Xi Jinping in 2013, and which now includes over 140 countries of the world, and which has 32 international organizations on board. And we are proud to say, as Pakistanis, that the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, is the centerpiece, is the flagship of the Belt and Road Initiative. And like the BRI, the CPEC itself is a success story. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk of this changing world order, what are we looking at? We are looking at huge transformations taking place before our eyes. What many observers, even in China and outside, have termed at once in a century changes. There is a shift, an inexorable shift in the global balance of economic and political power, away from the West to the East. And this is visible before us. The American century is coming to an end. And I think it was reflected what happened in Afghanistan on 15th of August 2021 with the exit of the American forces from there. Then we also see the retrenchment of US power, military power, particularly in Southwest Asia and broader parts of the Muslim world, especially with the coming of the end of an era of the 9/11 period, when shock and awe, use of military might, regime change were the mantra of US foreign policy, reflected in US military actions in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in parts of Somalia, and $6.5 trillion were squandered of the American taxpayers' money on a war without end against a nameless, faceless, and stateless enemy. And the result is before you. And in this period, over 300,000 tons of munitions, bombs, missiles, and drones were thrown in these countries. 900,000 people were killed. Over 30 million became homeless. So it's been a very traumatic period, probably the biggest global trauma that humanity has suffered after the end of the Second World War. And then we also see a major transformation, the emergence or the resurgence of Asia in what now many observers feel is the Asian century, the 21st century, in which China's peaceful rise is a centerpiece of these developments. So given these contexts, how do we see the global situation unfolding? The world is recovering from, again, a once-in-a-century pandemic, the biggest pandemic since the Spanish flu, which was over a century ago. And this pandemic still continues in certain parts of the world. We are grateful to China for its generous distribution of vaccines to Pakistan and other countries, which have saved millions of lives, helped millions of people to recover through Sinopharm, CanSino, Sinovac, as well as giving personal protective equipment, face masks, and also ventilators. We also have the challenge of climate change, which is affecting humanity and which is also like coronavirus pandemic, knows no borders, knows no religion, knows no ethnic origins or countries. So the need of the hour is to work together collectively to combat common challenges, be they climate change, be they the coronavirus pandemic, and be they the resurgence of the Cold War mindset, which we find in certain sections in the West, whose manifestation is very clear. We are seeing there are attempts to fashion a new kind of NATO, a global NATO, if you will, by the United States. The Quad, which includes the US, which includes India, which includes Australia and Japan. We have seen AUKUS, Australia, UK, United States. We are also seeing the Strategic Competition Act passed by the United States Congress, which has a full-fledged countering China influence fund of $300 million, essentially part of a propaganda machinery. And we are also seeing, after the recent speech of Secretary of State Blinken of the US, that they will establish a China House within their own system to coordinate policy towards China, which is now being seen as the new enemy, the new adversary, or as Blinken said, the foremost challenge to the United States. And recently also we have seen that the United States has launched a copycat program of the BRI, the Build Back Better World, B3W. And not to be left behind, the European Union has also launched another copycat program of the BRI called Global Gateway. So the debate is all about China. And then reinforcing this narrative about China is the new conflict in Europe, the conflict in Ukraine. A lot of people in the developing countries, including Pakistan, share the view of Pope Francis, who said on 14th of June that the war in Ukraine was either somehow provoked or it could have been prevented. And also we feel that in this context, the views of Dr. Kissinger, who said that continuing this war means carrying the war to Russia. And he is also one of those exponents of realpolitik who feel that NATO's expansion is somehow provocative to the core interests of Russia in this region. And I would like to just briefly remind this distinguished audience that it was 25 years ago, way back in the 1997, when George F. Kennan, the father of containment, he wrote an article in the New York Times, said that any expansion of NATO would be a fateful error for American foreign policy in the post-Cold War period. So given this context, I think we see a clear divide. On the one side is the United States, some of its European partners, and perhaps some countries like Japan, Australia, and India, who are talking of containment of China and who are talking of a new Cold War. But on the other side, there is a large chunk of public opinion in the third world, in Asian, African, Latin American countries, who do not agree with this perspective. And this has been now reflected in the vote in the United Nations General Assembly on Ukraine, where countries like Pakistan and China and even India, a very close ally of the United States, and Indonesia, and Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, and the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, and Mexico, and South Africa, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, they did not vote. Of course, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and so forth. They did not vote with the United States. So this kind of divide is apparent. And in this context, I think there's a big challenge for us as Asians, for us who have experienced war, We have just recovered from a longest war in Asia, the 42-year-old Afghan War, which started in 1979 and which ended with the exit of the American troops in August 2021. And we in Pakistan have faced 3 Gulf wars, next door Iran, since 1980. And those living in Southeast Asia know about the Indochina Wars, which started in the 50s after the French campaign, and then the US campaign in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So given this context, we see 2 paths before us. There is the path of connectivity and cooperation, of which the leading example is the Belt and Road Initiative, which brings together corridors, cultures, and connectivity through win-win cooperation. And the other path is of conflict and confrontation. 21st century Asia, and indeed the world, can no longer afford a new conflict, a new Cold War, or policies of containment. So let us try to build a better, peaceful, and prosperous future together, because the challenges are common, which require a collective approach, as the coronavirus pandemic and climate change crisis have shown. And Cold War is certainly not on the agenda of most of humanity, especially the developing countries of the third world. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Senator Mushaid Hussain. That was a very clear perspective on the realities of geopolitical realities right now. And his central message was that we all need to, oh, sorry. You can hear me? Okay. And his central message.
Madam, I just wanted to welcome Excellency Su Siara, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Cambodian Parliament. He's just joined us, and I just wanted to welcome.
Welcome, Your Excellency Yara. Well, the central message that Senator Mushaid Hussain was giving was that we need to build a better, peaceful, prosperous future together through connectivity and collaboration. And that must take us away from the current debates on conflict and resurgence of the Cold War. I have now on my list Admiral Jainath Colombage. He was the former Foreign Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka. Admiral Jainath Colombage has served the Sri Lankan Navy for a period of 36 years. He holds a PhD, and he is a visiting lecturer in many universities in Sri Lanka as well as in China. He's a fellow of the Nautical Institute, London, UK, and is a guest professor at the Sichuan University and Leshan Normal University in China. He has impressive credentials. I would now request him to address today's seminar on the topic that of his choice, which is, well, I'll let him speak, but South Asia and the BRI, how to enhance connectivity amidst the post-pandemic challenges. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Mr. Mustafa. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be with you once again, talking on a very pertinent topic for the time that we live in, and especially in the case of Sri Lanka. So I will be a little blunt today. I will not be the diplomat talking or the foreign secretary talking, but I'm the independent scholar talking for my country, representing South Asia. So I think you may have to forgive me for my tone and the points that I'm going to talk today, because I don't want to paint a very rosy picture about BRI and say that everything is great. It is not great. So we have to do something, as the Honorable Senator said. We have to take the initiative for Asia, and we have to take our own initiative. Otherwise, we will continue to dance to the tune of others who are having a great geostrategic, geopolitical interest in our region. I think we were all waiting to use this word, the post-pandemic, And right now, I think we all can be happy. We can use it because now the incidence of COVID has gone down. Hospitalization has gone down, is almost 10, about 10 per day in Sri Lanka. Number of deaths has gone really almost zero. It is non-existent. And Sri Lanka has been able to provide the vaccination to about 95% of its targeted population. And that is the first and the second doses. But when it came to the booster, it is much, much less. And now we are giving even the second booster. Earlier, it was in millions. Now it is in thousands. Now, in this regard, I have to say Sri Lanka received great support from China. Approximately 70% of the vaccination that we have given to our people came from China. So thank you very much, China. And not only the vaccination, other medical equipment, and sometimes even food. So we have really benefited from China, India, USA, UK, Japan, and many friends in this hour of need. But you see, now we are happily saying that it is the post-COVID period. But then the economic impact of COVID, we are feeling very, very badly right now. If I very briefly tell you the three pillars of Sri Lankan economy, I'm representing the South Asian viewpoint, but more so the case study is Sri Lanka, because this is the best example I can give in talking about this topic. So our three pillars of our economy was exports, remittance, and tourism. You know, because of the COVID pandemic, the exports took a nosedive. However, they survived and they bounced back because they started manufacturing personal protective equipment. I mean, changing from Lingeriya night dresses, they started making PPE, and that was good business at that time. So the exports bounced back. The second one was foreign remittance. Now, during the COVID pandemic, large number of expatriate Sri Lankan workers lost their job and they came back. And they could not go back also. Now they have gradually started going back. So there was a dip in the foreign remittance coming to the country. The third pillar of our economy was tourism. Now, during the COVID pandemic, we all know because of travel restrictions, quarantine processes, flight limitation, the tourism became zero. Now, for 2 years in a row, that is 2020 and 2021, Sri Lankan tourism suffered zero. Right, that was a per annum 4.5 billion US dollar industry in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is basically a tourist paradise and we have many things to offer. But unfortunately, that 4.5 billion per year, 2 years in a row, that's about 9 billion US dollars we lost because we lost the revenue from tourism. Now, 9 million US dollars for a small economy like Sri Lanka is quite a lot. So that is the problem that we have in Sri Lanka at this moment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, because that we lost that 9 billion US dollars, we were unable to pay our debt. So we had to default. I mean, Sri Lanka has never, ever defaulted in loan payment in its history of 73 years. But this time, we had no choice but to default our foreign loan obligation, including international sovereign bonds. We had to default. And then Fitch rating and other ratings gave a very negative outlook for Sri Lankan economy. Now that deterred foreign direct investment coming in. Now we are in a very difficult situation and we have negative rating and we have loss of foreign revenue, and then we have defaulted in our payment. And now that actually has led to scarcity in fuel, scarcity in gas, scarcity in essential medicine, and now even it is coming to food, right? So once these 4 items are not available to the common people, they have gone to the street and they are protesting. Some of the protests were simply non-violent, but majority of the protests are violent because the livelihood of people are impacted because they don't have gas, oil, medicine, food. These are the 4 basic things that the people need. Now, the saddest part is during the period of 3 months, our prime minister had to go, the cabinet had to be appointed 3 times, and new ministers had to be sworn in every time a new cabinet has been appointed. And a prime minister was sworn in, but he only had one seat in the parliament. This is never heard in the history of, I think, any country. I mean, we have 225 seats in our parliament, but a member with one seat has become the prime minister of the country. I'm not saying he's bad at all. He has accepted the challenge, but the fact remains that we suffered immensely. So, ladies and gentlemen, now the schools are impacted, public transport is impacted, farmers are impacted, export production is impacted. Now we are waiting to receive a bailout package from IMF, but it's not yet coming very soon. And on top of this came the senator also mentioned the unintended consequence of the Ukraine conflict. The barrel of oil was hovering around $80 per barrel, and it went up to about, the Brent mark went up to about $140. Now, who is going to pay that difference? And the price of gas has gone up, and that has impacted the construction industry. So, ladies and gentlemen, now the BRI project in 2014, Sri Lanka was one of the countries who joined the BRI with big hope, with a lot of aspiration, and 3 key projects were launched in Sri Lanka regarding BRI. But actually it's one major project called the Port City. The Hambantota port, that is in the southern port, which is compared with the Gwadar port in Pakistan, was even earlier than the BRI. Then the Colombo International Container Terminal was slightly earlier than the launch of BRI. But all these 3 projects are considered as part of the BRI project. So the flagship project that we have in Sri Lanka is the Port City, which is about 276 hectares of reclaimed land. It was going to be the financial center for the region, but unfortunately, due to various economic setbacks, that project has slowed down considerably. And ladies and gentlemen, unless the economy start moving, unless the economy start rotating, right now, the people are not thinking about foreign direct investment in a big way. Right now, people are not thinking about highways. Right now, people are not thinking about international financial centers. What people need now is food on the plate, gas on the stove, and fuel to travel here and there. And most importantly, the medicine. These 4 basics are not available in the country. And right now, everything else will not be a priority. So this is some aspect, because this is a huge challenge for BRI, because when the people of that particular country or the member country is not having the BRI as the priority number 1, then the impact on the BRI will be really great. And also, we all know that BRI, it is not only the people of the country, but the region. As a region, there is a lot of there is a lot of opposition to the BRI from the inception. Now, we heard the senator speaking about global gateway and other incentives. So similarly, there were a lot of strategic opposition to the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, combine that strategic opposition with the economic downturn in the country, it is really going to impact the progress of BRI projects in the country. Now, China is a major development partner in Sri Lanka. Many large-scale projects were undertaken by China, and many people accuse China of having a debt trap on Sri Lanka, but it is not true. Out of the total debt, less than 10% only we owe to China. Now, Japan is the number 1. We owe, then Asia Development Bank, and then China. It is less than 10%. However, that 10% is very great for the country at this moment. And therefore, we need the support, because right now the Sri Lanka has gone to IMF. Now IMF, the discussions, technical visits, inspections are going on, but we don't know when and if they will come out with a package to help Sri Lanka. What we right now need is bridging financing. Now we have high hopes on China. We have high hopes on Japan. India has already supported us big time. Everyone has supported us, but India has come forward with about $5 billion US dollar package at different levels with credit lines and medicine and things like that for food security. But we do hope that until we get the IMF tranche, the other countries will also support Sri Lanka to come out of this economy and start moving the economy. Otherwise, the Belt and Road projects in the country will continue to suffer because it will not get the desired attention that it should be getting from our country. So this may be common to even Nepal, Bangladesh, up to a certain level, Maldives. So this is basically impacting the whole South Asia. Pandemic induced economic downturn and the unintended consequences of the Ukrainian conflict and the extremely high prices of oil, gas, and shortages of food will be a factor. Unless the countries support these small economies to come out of this mess, the Belt and Road Initiative is going to suffer immensely. So therefore, that is what I mentioned in the beginning, that I really want to talk the truth, the true feeling of the country, because I used to praise BRI like anything. I am an ardent fan of BRI, but right now the mood has changed in Sri Lanka completely. So therefore, we need to do something to help the smaller economies to roll out the economy and start their construction and start the BRI projects again, so that we all can be connected, we all can be joined in this global maritime commerce. So with this, Madam, I conclude my talk, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Admiral Colombage. You made some very important points considering the situation, the economic situation that's created in the post-COVID era. I'm not too sure if we are fully post-COVID era, but we are there. And there are certain countries that continue to face COVID. But these important points are very strategic and underscore the fact that there has to be a collaborative process within the region as well for helping the small economies. Your emphasis on the support that's been given by China is significant, and that we all admire and appreciate. I will just underscore the fact that since we have a limited time, I would request everyone to keep their statements or their comments to 7 minutes each, so that we have enough time for comments and for question and answers as well. Thank you very much. Next, we have Dr. Wang Wen. He's the Executive Dean of the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at the Renmin University of China. He's he is also Secretary General of the Green Finance Committee of China Society for Finance and Banking, and a Senior Fellow of the Counselor Office of the State Council of China. And therefore, his input will provide us a very straight, a clear understanding of the thinking within the State Council of China on BRI in particular. He's written over 30 books. He has won many awards, such as a Special Prize for Policy Research in National High-Level Think Tank and Outstanding Achievements at the Renmin University of China in 2019. I welcome Dr. Wang Wen and request him to make his comments. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam. Thank you for having me. Because the organizer gave me the topic, China rise in the new Cold War and the future opportunity of the BRI. So I must say, something directly and honestly. Although the U.S. government has recently publicly stated that U.S. does not seek conflict with China or new Cold War with China, I believe that the United States is lying, and the U.S. is adopting a new Cold War approach in actual policy to contain and suppress China without a bottom line, to my honestly. And China was forced to fight back. If the United States does not stop those behaviors, I think once the tragedy of the new Cold War really occurs, the whole world will suffer. The current methods adopted by the United States include high-tech blockade, cutting off ships and operating systems to Huawei, suppressing Chinese social media, including TikTok and WeChat, and fabricating lies about so-called forced labor and genocide on Xinjiang, and imposed tariffs on $360 billion of Chinese goods, and a long-term interfering in China's internal affairs on issues such as Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong, and Xinjiang, and a long-term sledging against China's BRI and the other concepts, and push NATO Asianization and strengthen the five eyes allies and trying to contain China, etc. So now the most worrying thing is that the United States wants to create a war in Taiwan by replicating the crisis in Ukraine. From this perspective, to my honestly, the US is an evil country. In the past years, the United States has imposed more than 9,400 sanctions on the other countries. In the past 20 years, the United States has launched the war in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and lead the civil war in Syria, and the war in Libya, and now the war in Ukraine. More than 1 million civilians have died, and more than 10 million refugees happened. So as a scholar, I cannot accept it. Justice and conscience tell me that I need to stand up and to strongly condemn America. Of course, it is undeniable that United States technological innovation and university education have made contributions to the world. But the US foreign policy, especially the suppressing of emerging economies such as Islamic world, Russia, Iran, China, is a huge damage to the international order. And it is also a significant harm to the equality principle of the international relations. Now, more and more people are worried that a new Cold War between China and the US will break out. Yes, I have the same concerns as everyone else. Because China, but the problem is that China is reluctant to break out a new Cold War with US. China's US policy is generally restrained. You can see that senior US officials, congressmen, media, and think tank in US criticize China almost every day. But China's national leaders, remain silent except for the necessary counterattack from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this is Chinese style restraint. This is China's responsibility as a major country considering the overall situation. And this is also a strategic consideration that does not want the situation to worsen. However, China will not be patient in defending its core interest and will take post-action measures based on the active provocation of the United States. Just as the US launched a trade war against China in 2018, China resolutely fought back. At present, it seems that the US infraction is very serious, and the US is actively considering whether to cancel the additional tariff on China. The fact is that the US has lost the trade war. So I think in response to other US provocation, China countermeasures are also very strong, especially with regard to the Taiwan issue. If it goes on like current condition and the war is inevitable, then the responsibility should lie with the leaders of the United States and the Taiwan province of China. But if without American intervention, China is confident of peaceful unification. So in short, China is willing to cooperate with the United States, but China will not be afraid of the provocation of the United States. As there's a very famous song in China, when a friend comes, there's a good wine. If a wolf comes, what awaits is a shotgun. So from this perspective, China has a confidence and a strength to cope with the new Cold War. On the one hand, China has the ability to defend its core interest. And on the other hand, China is expanding cooperation, using cooperation to resolve conflict and ease the current tension situation. As you may not know, or you may know, China has become the world's largest foreign investor in 2021, and Pakistan is one of the China's largest foreign investment orientation. And the China-Pakistan economic corridor with a total has a total investment of more than 40 billion US dollars. And in 2023, next year, China will become the largest consumer market, and China will import $2 trillion US dollars of goods every year in the next 5 years, and hoping to make greater contributions to the world economic growth. So I think I agree with a few friends here right now. The progress of BRI now is very, very good. And China wants to cooperate with all countries, not conflict. So what I want to say finally is that despite many difficulties and challenges now, but please believe in China's future and our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang Wen. We certainly believe in the future of China, and we congratulate you on the work that China has done in uplifting more than 800 million people from poverty. It's an amazing feat, which I don't think any other country has done. So thank you very much for your comments, and you made some very important points about China's reluctance for a breakout of the Cold War, and that there has policies contrary to that effect need to stop it, because the whole world would be affected, as you see in the Ukraine war as well. Now I'd like to hand over the floor to Mr. Keith Bennett, who's the co-editor of Friends of Socialist China. He'll speak on what to expect in big power competition, how the Global South should respond. Just briefly, Mr. Bennett is the deputy chairman of the 40th Group Club, who pioneered Western trade with the People's Republic of China in 1953, and co-editor of the online platform of Friends of Socialist China. He's a specialist in Asian socialism and specifically its international relations. His career has been spent in journalism, including as a political editor of many weekly newspapers. Recently has worked on the Belt and Road Initiative, and he made a detailed study of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor at the invitation of the Pakistan government. He's currently working on a book provisionally entitled From Bandung to BRI, People's China and the Global South. Fascinating. We look forward to reading your book. And over to you, Mr. Bennett.
Oh, dear friends, thank you very much to the Pakistan-China Institute for your invitation to speak at this important and timely webinar. And thank you, Madam, for your very generous introduction, a very kind introduction. Thank you also to the Pakistan-China Institute for your consistent and sincere support to Friends of Socialist China, which we greatly value. It is nearly 33 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and nearly 31 years since the red flag was lowered from the Kremlin and the USSR ceased to exist. Such was the air of triumphalism that one political philosopher was even moved to declare the end of history. In return, we were promised a peace dividend, but for the peoples of the Global South in particular, there was no dividend and there was no peace. For the peoples of Iraq, Afghanistan, and a number of other countries, there was only starvation, sanctions, and devastating war. Regarding the bigger countries outside the imperialist camp, Russia was treated as a humiliated and defeated nation, its people impoverished, the promise that there would be no NATO expansion broken not once, but 5 times, an essential background for anyone wishing to understand Russia's current special military operation in Ukraine. In the case of China, the People's Republic was not yet the economic, political, and military power that it is today. It was still appropriate to follow Deng Xiaoping's maxim of not taking the lead, biding one's time, and concealing one's strength. And despite the defeat of the attempted counter-revolution in 1989, there were still many in the West who pinned their hopes on an evolution, peaceful or otherwise, to capitalism, and on the demise or transformation of the Communist Party of China. How different the situation looks in 2022. Under President Putin, Russia stabilized its society, rebuilt its economy, and restored the country's self-respect. The transformation of China, particularly since the 18th Party Congress in 2012, has of course been completely phenomenal. China is now the world's second largest economy, the largest by some methods of calculation. Extreme poverty has been eliminated, and the country is well on the road to becoming a great, modern, democratic, prosperous, civilized, and beautiful socialist country. And China is, as Comrade Xi Jinping said at the 19th Party Congress, moving closer to center stage and making greater contributions to humanity. Socialism with Chinese characteristics, he further pointed out, offers a new option for other countries and nations who want to speed up their development while preserving their independence. Today, no major problem in the world is capable of solution without the active involvement of China. For its part, the US has seemingly ripped up decades of the Kissinger and Brzezinski playbooks, which with, it must be said, considerable success, had sought to shore up US hegemony by ensuring that Moscow and Beijing remained divided and exacerbating that division to the greatest possible extent. Instead, determined, with just a slight blip under President Trump, to promote aggressive, hostile, and confrontational policies towards both these great powers, the US, together with a handful of followers, has succeeded only in driving Russia and China closer together, to the extent that they now describe themselves as closer than allies and affirm that their friendship has no limits. For the other countries of the global South, whilst they are still gravely challenged and threatened by the imperialist powers and still face manifold difficulties, as our friend from Sri Lanka has so poignantly explained, these developments open up a range of opportunities and possibilities. A key example is the decisive military action taken by Russia at the request of the Syrian Arab Republic to defend that country from fundamentalist terrorism and its external backers. On the diplomatic level, one could cite the repeated joint vetoes cast in the United Nations Security Council by Russia and China in support of Syria, and the very welcome recent first joint China-Russia veto countering the US move to impose further sanctions on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. On the economic front, China's Belt and Road Initiative, the greatest investment and infrastructure program and opportunity in history, holds out the possibility of development of the national economy, enhanced connectivity, and improvement of people's living standards in countries across the global South and even beyond. On my visit to Pakistan in 2017, from Karot to Gowada, I was able to see the transformative potential and reality of the BRI's flagship China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Indeed, the all-weather friendship and iron brotherhood between China and Pakistan is a true model for relations between developing countries and neighboring countries with different social systems. That this relationship is not hostage to domestic political circumstances can be seen from Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari making China the destination for his first official bilateral visit recently. Faced with both the challenges and opportunities presented by the current global situation, the countries of the global South need, above all, to reinforce and strengthen their unity and solidarity, politically, diplomatically, economically, militarily, culturally, scientifically, and socially. This entails strengthening and further consolidating the regional and wider organizations created over the years, including the BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Eurasian Economic Union, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, African Union, the Bolivarian Alliance, ALBA, Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, Union of South American Nations, UNISOR, Caribbean Community, CARICOM, and so on. Particular importance should be attached at this stage to economic cooperation, for example, through increased trade, mutual investment and joint ventures, the creation of free trade areas, regional integration, and so on. A key link is to break the international hegemony of the US dollar. The introduction of currency swap arrangements, new international payment systems and mechanisms, the internationalization of the RMB, the creation and development of sovereign digital currencies, such as that initiated by China, non-dollar pricing and trading of key commodities, and moves to develop regional common currencies, such as the recent such initiative by the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, are all vital to economic development and especially to overcome the truly genocidal use of unilateral sanctions, along with the freezing and outright theft of foreign exchange and gold reserves, property and other assets that, from Afghanistan to Venezuela to Russia, are being increasingly used to blackmail, bully, threaten, cajole, punish, and economically cripple both sovereign states and their nationals. The Global South needs to put up the banner of collective self-reliance. In this regard, the non-aligned movement needs to be further revived and strengthened as a universal organization of the Global South. Non-alignment is not neutrality. It is the collective independent space in world affairs created by the countries of the Global South themselves. In this regard, we commend in particular the work of the immediate past president of the non-aligned movement, Bolivarian Venezuela, and its current chair, Azerbaijan, and attach positive significance to last week's visit to Baku by Venezuelan President Maduro. The countries of the Global South, of course, vary widely in size, population, level, and stage of economic development, social and political system, religious belief, culture, and so on. But they all share a legacy of imperialist or colonial bullying and oppression, and they also all share the common tasks of maintaining their independence, developing their national economies, and improving their people's livelihoods. The differences between the countries of the Global South should not be used or allowed to divide them. Unity is strength. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bennett. It's a very interesting statement you made, the comments you made, and the reference you made to the rise of China, and that nothing can happen globally at this level, today, at the global level, without China's participation. And this is something that has to be recognized at all levels. And then your focus on collective alliance of the South in order to beat the hegemony of the Western world, especially economic measures to break the US dollar hegemony are significant points. Next, I would request Mr. Suos Yara, Chairman of the Commission of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, Media Information of the National Assembly of Cambodia, to speak on Belt and Road Initiative in the post-pandemic world order, the example of Cambodia. Mr. Yara is a Cambodian politician who serves as a spokesperson for the Cambodian People's Party. He's a member of the National Assembly of Cambodia, and he also serves as a member of the Central Committee of the Cambodian People's Party and is Vice Chairman of the Commission for External Relations. I would request His Excellency Suos Yara to speak today on the specific topic that I have already spoken of. Over to you.
Hi, Madam Chair, give me a minute because I'm speaking now in another parliament. So give me a few minutes and I will come back to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can we will move on then to the next speaker, which is Mr. William Jones. And then we come back to Mr. Yara. So Mr. William Jones is a former White House correspondent. Is he available? Mr. Jones available?
Mr. William Jones is in the process of logging in because he's
Okay.
joining from.
Would you like to take over then, Mustafa?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can make my speech in the meanwhile. And then
Okay.
we can
So now I hand over the floor to Mr. Mustafa Haider Syed, who is the Executive Director of Pakistan-China Institute. He will be speaking on Pakistan's role in the emerging world order, corridors, cultures, and connectivity. And I shall not elaborate on his very impressive CV because I'm sure all of you know him, and
Thank
we
you.
have a limited time left. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to speak alongside such incredible people from different corners of the world, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. So I'll dive right in. I think very, very thought-provoking input from people like Excellency Jayanath from Sri Lanka to my friend Mr. Wang Wen, and of course, Mr. Keith and Madam Chair. I think, you know, the lens that we need to look at it, the situation from is how this big power competition and its intended and unintended consequences affect the countries such as ours. Because do we really have a dog in the fight? And if we do have a dog in the fight, how much can we sustain? Can we bite more than we can chew? Or are we biting more than we can chew? And what will happen with the choices that we make today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What will be the implications and impact of that? Because what is happening is, and also as Senator Mushaid said earlier, that when he's talked about the biggest event after World War II is that this new Cold War is impacting greatly the global South and countries which are relatively marginal like ours, that need economic security, economic sovereignty, food security, preservation in terms of environment and climate change. And where I think, as our friend Mr. Jayanath said very aptly, I think the priority for the majority of the people in our part of the world is food on the table. How will we put fuel in our car when we go from one city to the next? These are the priorities, right? And those are being adversely affected. And in Pakistan, we are seeing that the middle class is suffering in a very big way because of the international inflation, which is affecting the world, also very much so Pakistan, and we are also in an economic crisis. So how can we make choices today in how we navigate through this complex maze of diplomatic prowess, while we want very close and very preserve and maintain and take forward our relationship with Beijing, which is our all-weather strategic partner and has supported Pakistan in all its core interests from Pakistan's very inception. And Pakistan has, of course, vice versa, supported China on its core interests and serves as also a protective layer for its underbelly, vulnerable underbelly, which is Xinjiang. And of course, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is the signature initiative of President Xi Jinping's BRI. As my friend Keith pointed out, what our countries need to see is, and to learn is, how to balance our relationships and reprioritize on economic and food security. I think this is becoming the biggest challenge of our part of the world. Pakistan has been a wheat producing country and we are an agrarian economy. But as we speak, we are importing wheat, I think first time in our history, from outside. And that is also interlinked with climate change. So I can't help but quote Deng Xiaoping, who said that clean your house before you invite guests. And that's what China did. Till 1979, when the opening up and reform took place, China focused on its domestic economic consolidation. And after it consolidated economically, domestically, strengthened its manufacturing base, became the biggest factory of the world, it opened up to the world, engaged with the global economy, and eventually joined the World Trade Organization, which Beijing should, of course, thank Washington for, because Washington thought that after they joined the WTO, they will become part of the conventional liberal order. But what happened was that the WTO propelled Beijing to the second biggest economy of the world that it is today, and it will, as forecasted by IMF and the World Bank, probably the biggest economy by 2030. And as Mr. Wang Wen has predicted, it's a big prediction that by next year, it will be the biggest consumer market in the world to date. So I think we should follow Deng Xiaoping's model of clean your house before you invite guests. This is, I think, very, very important, because what Sri Lanka has, as Mr. Jainath said, and I thought, Mr. Jainath, that you were very balanced, even though you scared us a little bit before you started speaking. To be very honest, you said that the BRI has done a lot of good for you, but it has to be synergized with your domestic economic recovery and your domestic circumstances. Only then can you have the luxury to engage with the Belt and Road Initiative. That is what I understood from your excellent and very balanced, honest remarks, I must say. So what we need to do is, what is the number one priority for post-pandemic? High inflation, people out of jobs, high unemployment, how to consolidate, maintain, and enlarge our middle classes in our countries. Because without a strong middle class, with increasing poverty, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, or any developing country cannot engage with big projects. We don't have the luxury to do that. And I think that said, the Belt and Road Initiative offers a unique vantage point for the Global South simultaneously, because there were only two options available which were offered by the Bretton Woods institutions and World Bank and IMF. And of course, Asian Development Bank was also an important part of it. But the Belt and Road Initiative has provided an opportunity for countries like Pakistan, like Sri Lanka, like Cambodia, like other countries to help forge a win-win partnership, which is export-based. If we look at the special economic zones, and Excellency Susiara will, I'm sure, shed light on that, a very successful model, and I've written a chapter on this special economic zone, on the special economic zone in Sihanoukville, which is actually one of the models of SEZs in the Belt and Road Initiative, of how Chinese enterprises have relocated successfully in that SEZ and now are exporting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of product from Cambodia to China and other parts of the world. So I think and in Ethiopia, which is a model BRI country in Africa, similar to SEZs have been set up, which are also exporting from the special economic zone in joint venture with local companies and Chinese enterprises to different parts of Africa, back to China and Asia. I think that this model of export-led growth that can come via the Belt and Road Initiative is what is really, really required, because that increases FDI in host countries. It increases exports. It improves the foreign exchange reserves of those countries, and it helps in connectivity between enterprises, business to business. Because as you know, Excellency Jainath, that the Belt and Road Initiative has different aspects to it. You did the port city project, and you also mentioned the airport. We also had mega infrastructure projects like the Orange Line in Lahore, which is over $2 billion. Then we've had power projects. And on SEZs, we have to do more. We have, still requires more attention and investment. So I think where do we go within the BRI? Because when you talk about the BRI, it's a huge cocktail of projects and it's different layers. So I think that is the way forward, is learning from those countries which have done it right, who've gotten it right, particularly vis-a-vis SEZs. And the second phase of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is supposed to be of special economic zones, which can actually be a game changer for countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and other countries in the global south. And that said, I think that final point on Pakistan-China relations is that Pakistan's consistently support China, and China has consistently supported Pakistan on its core interests. And before it used to be strategic, political, and defense, and now this economic partnership has, I think, been really the icing on top, and it covers all aspects of the relationship, with 20,000 students under the BRI scholarship program studying, 20,000 Pakistani students studying in China. So the relationship with China is really a model relationship that Pakistan and China enjoy. And I think that it needs to be further consolidated. And there is no comparison of Pakistan-China relations with the relationship of Pakistan with other countries. It's really a unique relationship, but it's very important to preserve, maintain, and take this relationship forward and not take it for granted. It's because there's a lot of consistent input and contribution been done by successive generations and successive leadership from both sides for this relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mustafa. We are running out of time. I would just like to add that with what you said, that Pakistan-China relationship, the most important element of it is its constancy and its amazing ability to transcend the usual considerations of international politics. This is something I've said in the past as well. Thank you very much. And now I would hand the floor to His Excellency Sos Yara, Chairman of the Commission on Foreign Relations, International Cooperation, Media and Information of the National Assembly of Cambodia. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I heard from our colleague that we talk about Berlin Wall, and now at the Berlin Wall. So greeting you from Berlin. Of course, let me contribute to what Cambodia thought about Belt and Road. The COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine have been shaking the very foundation of the international orders. Multilateralism and rule-based international orders are under the strain due to the populist politics, protectionism, and heightening the geopolitical rivalry between and among the major power. Small states are facing the unprecedented challenges after the end of the Cold War, as they are being forced to take sides. Taking this opportunity, I like to assert that Cambodia is not interested in taking sides. Cambodia is a pro-Cambodia, and we are friend to all and enemy to none. Nothing is more valuable than freedom, independence, and sovereignty under the UN charters. The New World Order is being formed, but we don't know the nature and characteristic of the New World Order yet. A multiplex world, perhaps best characterized for a new world order. In a multiplex world, different civilization and worldview peacefully coexist. No single civilization or ideology dominate the world. In other words, no more hegemonic power and orders. State and non-state actors collectively shape international relationship and the system. So what we wish for is to see a new world order to be more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient, in which small states can defend and protect their legitimate national interests. We wish to have a more inclusive and effective global governance. that can address emerging global issues and challenges. The reform of international institutions are therefore necessary. It's very important. I heard about our previous speaker mentioning about the reactivate of the non-aligned movement. For us, we like to encourage beyond that non-aligned movement. We need a universal peace charter that we need to work together under the UN charters. The Belt and Road Initiative provides us a critical space to exercise our agency, realize our potential and interest, and connect us with the outside world. BRI is an open and inclusive multilateralism system that upholds the core principle of mutual respect and equal sovereignty. So we are equal in BRI framework. Although China is the founder and the key promoter of initiative, it does not mean that China dictate or dominate the BRI. All BRI partners contribute intellectual, technical, and financial support to the realization of the BRI goal. So the BRI is a platform for cooperation between and among country partnership to build partnership building between the state and non-state actors. Public and private partnership, infrastructure development, for instance, play a critical role in infrastructure development and connectivity. I would like to stress here that infrastructure is the foundation of the social economic development and poverty reduction. It is commonly said in Cambodia that where there is a road, there is a hope and opportunity. The Belt and Road play a crucial role in Cambodia's socio-economic development. Cambodia government and peoples highly value the BRI project, as Mustafa just mentioned, about the special economic zone in one of our seaport. They, and with their activity and their investment, support Cambodia and our economic growth strongly right after the and during and after the post-COVID pandemic. So under this framework, during the difficult time and the hardship in the fight against the COVID pandemic, China, under the framework of the Health Silk Road, has also provided substantial support in developing countries, including Cambodia and Pakistan, among the others. So the post-COVID recovery requires international cooperation and partnership. We must recover together so that we can grow stronger and become more resilient. China is the engine of regional recovery. China for Southeast economic ties have been further strengthened and deepened during the pandemic. We share the view that greater regional integration and interdependence will help us to become more resilient. I am optimistic that BRI will contribute to the improvement of the global governance and strengthening of open and inclusive multilateralism. BRI will continue to stand as a platform for other regional connectivity, such as Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, that was established in November 2020 and come into force on the 1st January 2022. So the RCEP agreement signed by 15 countries will benefit from the free trade and manufacturing, including infrastructure connectivity, to relocate the regional and global value chain into Asian region. So we are equal under the BRI framework. So the BRI need to continue advancing the principle of mutual respect, mutual interest, and equal sovereignty. Cambodia, as a small and open economy in Southeast Asia, embrace the BRI and work with all BRI partners for peace and sustainable development. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you everyone for attending this forum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yara. This was a very significant, important statement on the importance that Cambodia attaches to the BRI and how it has helped develop infrastructure in Cambodia. your special input is stress on the fact that BRI and the China-BRI relationship with all the partner countries is based on mutual respect, sovereignty, and equal opportunity and equal understanding, respect for whatever the views are of different countries. I thank you very much for taking time off, your valuable time right now from Berlin. I will now request Mr. William Jones, former White House correspondent for the Executive Intelligence Review. He will speak on Washington's China policy implications for Asia. Mr. William Jones is a non-resident fellow of Zhongyang Institute for Financial Studies, Renmin University of China. He has covered the White House and the State Department for EIR, and has followed Chinese politics and has written extensively on China since the meeting of President Clinton and Jiang Zemin at the EPEC Summit in Seattle in 1993. He is, so I would request, if Mr. William Jones is there, I would request him to make his comments. Over to you. I believe
I think he is having some internet issues in logging in. So
okay, so what we can do is that since we've already sort of run over the time that Mustafa had indicated to me, he can come in at any point that he wishes. But the most important, I'd like to just highlight a few points right now before we make we move to any questions that may be. Firstly, I think we've had a very fruitful discussion and exchange of views. The focus on country experiences have underscored the significance of BRI projects in economic development. And I think the point that has been made by Mr. Yara about the importance of the principles that that China and its implementation of the BRI vision, i.e. mutual respect and respect for sovereignty and equal measure of understanding on what the requirements of each country are important. We've also heard some ideas on how to sequester the BRI from the headwinds blowing from Washington. And here I'd like to thank Mr. Keith Bennett for his important statement on how we should look at the world and that the non-aligned movement could play an important role. But I mean, we can have a whole discussion on what the aligned movement can do right now. But yes, we need alliances of countries with mutual understanding of issues dealing with the South. And I agree, with Admiral Columbus, that there is a need for an alliance of countries of the South Asian region, for example. I hope that the work that the Pak China Institute is doing would factor in some of the comments that have been made on the BRI and the data the positive empirical data that is available in many participant countries in BRI. This would help in better analysis of the BRI operation and also counter the negativity coming from various quarters. I think we now have with us Mr. William Jones. So I would request him to make his intervention and then perhaps have a few questions. Over to you, Mr. Jones.
Yes, I'm very happy to be with you today. I'm sorry it was difficult connecting from the beginning, but here I am. It's a very important conference that's going on. I'm very happy to be a part of it. The world now is at a historical turning point. There are those who believe that we can return to the world of the last few decades where the power lay with the combined Western nations and organizations like the G7, NATO, and more broadly in the much touted transatlantic alliance with the cooperation of London and Wall Street, providing the financial backbone that kept the world afloat. For some countries, this was conceived as the best of all possible worlds. For others, it was almost a horror show. The end of the Bretton Woods system led, in fact, over several decades to the creation of a major financial bubble and a general deterioration in the quality of life of most of the world's citizens, including in the United States itself. The country that allegedly benefited most from a system in which it was primum inter pares, first among many of the G7 coterie. That system has effectually ended, and the world is headed, if policy has not quickly changed, for perhaps the worst economic crisis in centuries. The inflation rate is off the charts, and measures taken by central banks, including the Federal Reserve here, are having little effect. The sanctions imposed on Russia and the attempt to hamper the economic development of China by the United States and its allies will possibly lead to 1 billion people starving this year. This is not a result of the conflict in Ukraine, although that conflict and the West's determination not to end that conflict without a serious reduction in the power of Russia has made such a catastrophe almost inevitable. While the military action conducted by Russia was a serious move, it could be easily foreseen as the only move for a country that was under a threat of extinction by the West. The expansion of NATO eastward has never been a defensive move on the part of the West, but rather a political strategy to contain and weaken a Russia when it was clear that it was not prepared to simply submit to US dictates. Similarly, with China, when it was clear that a country with 1.4 billion people was effectively raising itself up from poverty and becoming the second most important economic power in the world, the warning signals went off in Washington, and the determination was made that China must be regarded as the United States' most important rival. Not that China exhibited any aggressive intentions against the United States, and certainly not against its partners, its neighbors in the Asia-Pacific region. On the contrary, with the Belt and Road Initiative, China was lighting the lamp of progress in a region that had been characterized for decades by poverty and misery. This included not only regional countries, but also countries in Africa and Latin America, which also had failed to develop under the dictates of the post-Bretton Woods system. This is what upset the United States the most. China was becoming the most major benefactor of the impoverished nations of the world, a role which the United States believed that it alone should play. But with the death of President Kennedy, there were few American leaders that have held any sway with the leaders of the developing world. And the first decade of development in the 1960s was effectively the last, at least until the initiation of the Belt and Road Initiative. The reaction to China's growth and the popularity among developing nations of the BRI policy led to a fierce reaction in Washington, where they are now bending over backwards to sabotage Chinese development through a policy of preventing the import of technological goods, particularly in the area of semiconductors. Their fierce determination to remain number one will have serious repercussions on the rest of the world. Indeed, they are already having these repercussions. But as the great German poet Friedrich Schiller said, there are limits to the power of the tyrant. We see those limits in the highest rate of inflation in 40 years in the United States. And the political turmoil that has characterized this nation for the last 2 years will increase as the economy begins to tumble. Similar perturbations will be occurring in Europe, perhaps even earlier, as the combined sanctions and counter-sanctions begin to take their toll on the European economy. Perhaps in the turmoil of the crisis, the world can find a different path forward based on solidarity and cooperation rather than conflict and war. China has been foremost in putting forward proposals of cooperation, even in the face of a more aggressive posture on the part of the United States. And the countries of Europe have also been beneficiaries of the Belt and Road policy, even though they have been strong-armed by the United States into going along with the more aggressive policy by NATO. In that sense, in the crisis which is now unfolding, may be, as the Chinese saying goes, precisely an opportunity to rethink the path forward and develop a new paradigm of international relations along the lines of President Xi's community of shared interests for mankind. The fact of the matter is that the status quo cannot be restored. If we succeed in avoiding this conflict in Ukraine from turning into a nuclear conflict, Russia will in all likelihood survive well the present economic measures being imposed by the West. There is little support for isolating Russia in the rest of the world. And politicians faced with failure in their containment policy abroad and faced with an angry citizenry here at home may in the end realize that the so-called American century will ultimately have to go the way of the British Empire, which it unfortunately often imitates. And a new paradigm based on cooperation between the major powers and focused on global development can emerge. This depends on whether people here in the United States can be convinced to mobilize what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature in acquiring a more enlightened understanding of the role of the United States in a clearly multilateral world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Jones, that it is an important comments that you've made. Better angels perhaps may have just vanished for now, so we have to work to bring them back. But there's a lot of effort that is being put in the BRI to help countries that are currently undergoing the crisis, post-pandemic crisis as well. And I think today's discussions have been very important in underscoring the impact of the COVID pandemic on the economies of the world, and especially of developing countries. Added to it is, of course, the Ukraine crisis, which brings in the difficulty of a food crisis. The food insecurity issue is a major one in the developing countries, because both Russia and Ukraine were providers of wheat and other important food items, and therefore it is. And I agree with you, the danger of 1 billion people starving is a very ominous one, but something that we need to all find ways of addressing at this point. So food insecurity and climate change are important, significant points that we need to factor in, and these have been factored in the discussions that Pakistan has had also in the context of CPEC, and the second phase of CPEC deals with improving agricultural productivity, industrialization, and some other aspects which would help strengthen Pakistan's, that was the infrastructure in the first stage, and now this. So now we've come to the end of the discussions. I do not see any questions as such that have come from the audience, and unfortunately, we've also run out of time as well. There's someone who says, I have some questions. Can you write them down so that we can immediately have them responded to? There's a Dr. Ahmed to everyone. If you have a question, kindly write it down so that we can have it responded to. Unless he can be brought online, but I guess that's difficult. In any case, what I basically would like to underscore that there are 2 or 3 important points that have come out of the discussions today. One, that there is a global downturn, economic downturn, because of the pandemic, because of the Ukraine war, because of climate change, and that these issues need to be addressed, and that the BRI, through its developmental projects, through its human-centric soft power issues as well, has been able to and is ready to work on these issues. It has been, as Mr. Bennett has said, that he has seen in his visit to Pakistan and his assessment of CPEC, the prosperity that CPEC has been able to bring to certain regions of Pakistan. That is significant as well. And so has Mr. Yara spoken about what impact has BRI had on Cambodia. Even Mr. Admiral Colombage has been able to refer to it. So there have been the positive aspects of the BRI, which we have been able to highlight today in today's discussions. And we need to all work together to ensure that these points are highlighted, as it would become a little difficult for the continuous attacks that BRI faces from some of our Western friends. Mustafa, do you have any of the questions? Because I don't see any.
Yes, Dr. Ahmed has not written anything so far,
No.
but I see that our dear patron and elder, General Talat Masood Sahib, has joined this Zoom meeting. He's a long-standing friend of China, and he's served in China as well. So if maybe we can ask him if he wants to make any comment, or and also I would like if he can give his brief context of his service in China for the other international guests who don't know him.
Okay, John Talat Masood Sahib, Assalamu alaikum. We're delighted to have you. Could
Thank
we have
you.
your comments?
Right. Well, I wasn't expecting to speak. I was expecting to listen to you and to others. But anyway, I have also a very strong, long association and a very interesting and a very fruitful association with China, with Chinese friends. I've been going to China since 1966 and continued to go till only about last 4 years that I haven't been there. Otherwise, I've been continuously going there. So I have seen China the way it has transformed itself, and the zeal of the people, the quality of the leadership, and it's an extraordinary, in the last 30, 40 years, the type of progress that they have made. There are seldom any examples like this that humanity can quote or nations can really witness the way that they did. And I think I saw them when there was only one hotel in Beijing, which was called Peking then, and now there are 10,000 probably. And look at the way that China has developed and has become the world's second largest economic power, and probably is also challenging the US to become the first. And leaving aside that, the zeal of the people, the quality of leadership, I think all these things, there are many that Pakistan can learn from. But at the same time, what I would like to also say that China is also transforming, because as it really interacts with the rest of the world, and the type of conflict that is going on in Ukraine has divided the world and is posing great challenge to the Chinese leadership as it is to the Russians and to the Europeans. So I think I do not know how things will evolve, but we are hoping that there will be a world in which there will be greater peace, and there will be sort of a determination to resolve the conflict rather than get engaged in it. Because if that happens, then Pakistan is also like other countries suffer. And the economies of these countries are also threatened more as a consequence of the conflict. So I think these are major considerations which might govern the destiny of nations. And in this, countries like China, which have an extremely important role and are leaders in a way, I think their policies would very much matter.
Thank you very much, General Saab. We also have Dr. Ahmed who wants to ask his question personally, if we can do so. Please, Dr.
Sure.
Ahmed.
Thank you. Thank you so much. To be very honest, I was listening to each speaker very, very seriously.